Welcome to Third Saturday in October podcast, your SEC tailgate podcast for the rest of us. I may have a little one playing guitar over here, but I am Tennessee Bradley. Across from me is birthday boy, Alabama Chris.
Hey, thanks, man.
I did not forget. So happy birthday. We got a lot to talk about on this special episode. I mean, Gus is gone, but Vandy's got their next coach, and my son just loves musical instruments. I've got guitars.
Hey, he's a future musician. We've got so much going on. We get a quick hangout from your son here in a little while. We talk about National Signing Day. We talk about new coaches. We talk about old coaches. We talk about barrier breaking point after touchdown kicks. We talk about so much. So we need to dive in because we're also going to be previewing the SEC championship game and the other games that we have coming up. So a ton to squeeze in to just a few minutes here talking about SEC football.
Yeah, it's weird, but I kind of like it because we've got National Signing Day, the early National Signing Day, and the championship for the SEC all in the same week. Yeah. A lot of stuff. If you're changing coaches, maybe not so good that all that's happening at the same time. If you've got the same coach as you did for the last season or two, probably better news for you, but interesting nonetheless. So let's dive into this week's episode of Third Saturday in October.
All right, so here we are. And you think that the season is starting to wind down, but there is I can't remember a week in the last at least 2 months where we've had so much stuff happen in the last couple of days, from last week's games to this week's upcoming SEC championship game. But right in the middle of that, we had National Signing Day, and it looks like we've got a pretty dominant SEC showing with 9 of our SEC teams hitting in at least the ESPN top 25 for national rankings.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
The dynasty is over at Alabama, so they just decided to go and sign another number one recruiting class. I'd never heard the dynasty is dead, really a lot of talk until they released the signing day rankings of, hey, we've actually signed these guys. And people are saying, oh, yeah, the dynasty's dead. What? No, I don't think anybody was saying that.
Yeah.
It's obviously not dead if Nick Saban is 10-0 to this point in the season. That doesn't sound like a dead dynasty to me.
Yeah, I heard another podcast talking about they're just tired of people bringing this idea up that, Saban is 69 years old. And he currently has the number one team in the country playing for an SEC championship, the number one recruiting class at this point in the game. And then 2, if not 3 people that are on their offense that could be considered Heisman contenders, if not 1 or 2 of them being kind of running away with the field right now, which we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, the talk about all that is pretty insane. And not to mention, just the kind of year that they've had improving on the defensive side. Yeah. We've got a kicker finally. We've got an offense that seems like it's firing. When we kind of expected this offense last year with Tua, but when he went down, that kind of shot those hopes. So with the idea that we're doing this with Mac Jones and reloading again, it's pretty impressive. So yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting when you hear people talk about this, and I get it. I mean, if I was not an Alabama fan, I'd be tired of hearing some of these things as well. Sometimes I roll my eyes with how somebody like an Ohio State, they get the talking points because they're a perennial favorite, and so regardless of if they've played enough games or done proven to the rest of the country that they are worth it, they are sitting in that top 4. So regardless,
yeah,
I understand, but. Yeah.
Well, Alabama had 19 ESPN 300 commits, which basically that just means ESPN has a list of 300 high school players, and these are the players that ESPN thinks are the best. Alabama went and got 19 of them. Now compare that to Tennessee, who is 14th in the national rankings. They only got 7 commits, less than half. But let's run down these the SEC National Signing Day ESPN rankings. Number 1, Alabama. Number 3 nationally, Georgia. Number 4, LSU. 7, Florida. 12, Texas A&M. Tennessee comes in at 14th, then followed by Ole Miss at 19th, Arkansas at 21, Auburn. I don't know where they were projected to be before Gus Malzahn was fired, but they came in at 24, Mizzou 31, Mississippi State 38, Kentucky 40, Vanderbilt 56, South Carolina 74. I mean, 13 out of the 14 teams show up in the top half of the rankings. South Carolina coming in at 74, just below the halfway point.
And that makes sense, knowing that they are, had some turmoil there, a coaching loss. What I've heard over the years is South Carolina, especially in the SEC, is a difficult team to recruit for. Tennessee and Vandy both, or I'm sorry, not Tennessee, South Carolina and Vanderbilt both are kind of difficult recruiting areas. But yeah, I mean, 9 of the 14 SEC schools in the top 25, I think, is a pretty interesting ranking as well. And just to echo what you said, I think Auburn was expected to be a little higher, but with Gus being fired a few days ago, that didn't help them in this recruiting class. So this probably won't be a banner year for Auburn and what they were expecting versus where they're going to end up being ranked.
Yeah, we've talked about how long should a coach have to kind of establish his team. Yeah. And I may have said this before, but with the early signing day, I feel like that almost means a coach should automatically be given an extra year because, I mean, Gus Malzahn was fired on Sunday, I believe, and turnaround for Wednesday, National Signing Day. I mean, they don't have a head coach. Kevin Steele is filling in, but Steele doesn't know if he's going to be there next year.
Yeah.
So how do you recruit? I mean, you got to rely on your other players. Your players that are going to stay and the players that are currently there. Seeing all the talk about Pruitt, should he be fired? That obviously hurt Tennessee's recruiting a little bit the last few days because we've seen several commits flip. Not necessarily all of them signed this week. Some of them are not signed, I guess, because of this, not signing early and going to sign on the normal day, which I guess is in January, maybe. But at the same time, I don't know. I think some of the guys that we really wanted signed. I know this quarterback that we really wanted signed, so I feel good about that. And I don't know. I think Tennessee it's getting harder to recruit for Tennessee because just over the hills you've got Clemson. That's a reason why South Carolina has a hard time recruiting in this area, because over there they've got to compete with Clemson. But then when you're looking at just recruiting the state of Tennessee, I mean, Tuscaloosa is not that far from Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
Memphis is much closer to Ole Miss than
and gaining steam. Yeah.
Yeah. Lane Kiffin's a great recruiter. He also seems to be really fun to play for Lane Kiffin. The reporters were asking him about, hey, has Auburn reached out to you? This, that, and the other. His response was, I'm going to say this now so I don't get asked it again. I'm not going to be the coach at Alabama. And so I love it. He just has fun with reporters, I think, and I love it. But
yeah, another piece that I heard about National Signing Day that Lane Kiffin did, I think that Ole Miss flipped a wide receiver or somebody that had initially committed to Mississippi State, and Ole Miss flipped them, and then Lane retweeted that player's tweet from a couple months ago when he announced that he was going to Mississippi State. He retweeted that tweet. So it kind of dragged Mississippi State even in a retweet.
yeah, well, tracking his own player.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do I feel about National Signing Day? I'm not surprised. And in a way, if they're not committed to the guys who are already on the team and the current coaching staff who is going to be there next year, I mean, if they haven't fired them now, then, I'm not sure that they're going to fire them, especially after early National Signing Day. If they're not committed to their teammates and to their coaches now, I'm not sure that I want them anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. Do I wish Tennessee was higher? Yes, but 14th in the nation, that's still not bad.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it was a good day overall for almost all the SEC teams. Again, Auburn probably did a little worse than they expected to. I think Missouri did a lot better than they expected to be. Ole Miss, obviously being in the top 20 is good. And then especially like the Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, Texas A&M and Tennessee, again, that like top 15, we have almost half of our entire conference in the top 15, which is pretty insane.
Yeah, and I mean, look out for Arkansas, signed number 21 class in the nation.
Yeah.
Look what they did with lesser talent this year. I mean, not sure what it'll look like next year. Will there be a sophomore slump for Sam Pittman? Who knows? But
yeah,
fun nonetheless. I think it's hard for me to follow all the recruiting because there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's just, hey, once it's all done, send me the list so I can start learning names and get excited then.
Yeah.
So, Chris, this weekend we've got the SEC championship. It was billed to be, this matchup between Alabama and Florida, both coming in hot, and Florida is now more stumbling into the game. Does that make you feel better? Does that make you feel a little more worried? What's your reaction as an Alabama fan, having seen the end of that Florida-LSU game?
Again, I tend to be a negative Nancy when I'm looking at my particular team because I can see all the details that, if not paid attention to, could cause havoc, wreak havoc, cause chaos. And so it actually scares me the way that Florida lost last week to LSU, because that puts a lot of emphasis on them to not be able to rest on their laurels. Florida is going to want to come in and prove that they deserve to be there in the championship game. I think that even with Kyle Trask not having the type of game that he wanted to, I mean, he added several more touchdowns to his total, but then I think, what was it? Florida had 4 turnovers, I believe.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 or 3 interceptions.
2 or 3 interceptions. And so, yeah. And so for him, it seems like that, like we've talked about for a couple of weeks here on our show, and then nationally as well, that it seems like the SEC championship game is going to determine not only the college football playoff landscape and what that's going to look like. Now that may be a little different with Florida. Even if they win, I think only have a 40% chance of making it into the college football playoffs. But it was supposed to be a race to see who was going to take home the Heisman. And it still really could be if Trask really goes off and smokes Alabama's defense, which it is set up to where he could, even though I think Alabama has really, really improved over the season in the secondary. But if he goes off, then the Heisman is going to be up in question there. But between he and Mac Jones and then Devontae Smith, I'm seeing in several different Heisman categories that Devontae is either ranked third right now or ranked fourth. And those that he's ranked fourth, it's for Trevor Lawrence. It's coming in third in some of those polls. And so 3 out of the 4 Heisman contenders right now of the top 4 are going to be playing in Saturday's game. So there's a lot up for grabs if you look even beyond just the idea of getting that SEC championship.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, Trask, though he added touchdowns, added yards, still had turnovers. How does that affect the Heisman voting? Also,
yeah.
You can have an outstanding season, but if you don't win, so if Florida loses, they've got 3 losses to a not good, I wouldn't say they're terrible, but not a great LSU team. And then Florida lost to A&M, who's really good. That's a quality loss.
Yeah.
But then to Alabama, like, I don't know.
It's so funny how some of these things tie in, because Florida losing last week actually hurts Texas A&M's chances of getting into the college football playoffs, because now their win over a really good Florida team doesn't look as good as it did on Saturday morning. So
Yeah.
It's wild how all of these things are taken into consideration, and how you weigh these teams in the early part of the season versus the middle versus the late part, and if you get a conference championship or if you're even there to play. So it's pretty wild to watch what people use as their measuring sticks as to who should be getting into the college football playoffs. But another year where now I'm hearing, who is it, the AAC commissioner talking about how they should abolish the college football playoff system and go back to the old BCS system, where the computers essentially chose who would be playing in that championship, because a undefeated Cincinnati is now being outranked by 3 teams in Florida, Georgia, and I forget the other one, who have got 2 losses apiece at this point. So it's always interesting. Some weeks I'm all about a 4-team playoff and letting the championship, the conference championships, act as a de facto round 1 of a playoff system. And so some weeks I'm all about that. I think I even went on record here a month or so ago and said as much. But then I look at layouts of if we had a 16-team playoff system or an 8-team, what that would look like. And man, it sure does look fun. It's an extra game or 2 for some of those schools. Gosh, it looks like it'd be fun to see all that come down to the wire at the end of the season.
So I say that Georgia and Cincinnati should meet in a bowl game. Let's see how Cincinnati stacks up. Now, if Cincinnati wins, it's like, oh, sorry. But I don't think they do, especially now that Georgia.
Sorry, I don't know the answer to that one.
No, I do have an
talking
answer
to
to this one. Back off, Siri. Now that Georgia seems to have found its quarterback for the season here in the last 2 games. But JT Daniels really looking like he understands what to do with this offense. Moving the ball well, just seems competent. He's big enough to see over the line, which helps. But I say let's let Cincinnati and Georgia go at it, or Cincinnati and Florida, either one.
I think that's a really good point. And like you've said in past weeks, that everybody is bowl eligible this year. All teams, unless they're LSU and they take themselves out to be the nice guy. which we kind of had a little laugh at last week. But
Yeah.
it would be interesting to see some of those matchups. You won't see this in the college football playoffs. These teams won't be vying for a national championship. But let's give you some of these answers. Will Cincinnati stack up to somebody like a Georgia? That would be really fun. And I'd love to not only in the next week or two talk about the SEC teams that make it into a bowl game, but maybe some of the bowl games that we wish that we could have seen. Because that matchup, I doubt that we will see a Georgia Cincinnati, but it would be a lot of fun to see a Georgia Cincinnati. Just again to put the argument to bed.
It'd just be the black and red bowl.
That's true. That's true. And to just briefly mention Georgia, I'm freaking scared of Georgia next year. It looks like I've heard a couple of people say that they assume that Georgia, or there's the potential for Georgia to be a preseason number one going into next season because of the issues that they have resolved and who they have coming back. That seems like a big ask for somebody that's lingering in the bottom half of the top 10 right now.
Yeah.
But again, Kirby seems to know how to recruit and reload, and it looks like he's learning from some of the mistakes that haunted him in the early part of the season.
Yeah, it's a bit like if you look at the season at halftime, Kirby decided to change quarterbacks, and the second half they won the second half. Problem was they were too far behind from the first half to win the SEC East. But I'll be interested to see what does JT Daniels do? Does he stick around for another year? I can't remember in what class he is, but we'll see what happens. Everybody's got eligibility next year, so
yeah.
But Chris, I want to get to this. What are your thoughts on Dan Mullen? Because the end of that Florida game was so weird. I mean, the game itself, there was fog. I don't know that you can really see across the field. I don't know how they're completing passes because how can you tell where the players are, where the receivers are? But you had some thoughts on Dan Mullen, and just kind of wanted to give you a soapbox and turn you loose.
Well, yeah, and it was a difficult thing. I was concerned for the announcers, the commentators last week, because I guess they were having to watch it like we did, just staring at a TV screen, because I know that several times they were even trying to figure out what was going on up there in the press box because they couldn't see all the specifics that they're usually able to pay attention to down on the field. So, yeah, concerned for them. And then when the whole throwing of the shoe or throwing of the cleat incident happened there, they were almost as confused as we were as to what was going on. So, yeah, I think if they were having to glue into those monitors that flank them up there in the press box. But, after the loss from Florida, Dan Mullen, he just had – I don't know what it is. It's weird that somebody who's been as successful as he has and is – doing something at this elite level that he has been, a head coach in the SEC now on his second school as a head coach in the SEC. You'd think that he really has to have himself together, but there's every now and then, there's been several times this season where it's popped up, and specifically last week after the game, there's like an unsportsmanship idea or thing that just it reads off of him is he's a poor sport. He's a poor loser. He's like, and so I don't know if this is just some like old school, old man version of me that pops up and goes, sit down, be respectful, that kind of thing. But that's what it feels like sometimes when I'm watching Dan Mullen, is it just seems like there's like a cockiness. And to some degree, I can understand being cocky in a position that he has, especially looking at some of the things that he's done over his career. Being a quarterback developer, it seems like this is another year where he's taken what I don't know that preseason we would have had a ton of hype for what he has been able to do for this Florida team. Because I think for the most part, we thought that Florida would be coming in number 2 in the SEC East. But to have the season that they've had, there's a lot of reason for his confidence. I know that there is often a difference in how you should perceive or you should put yourself out there when it comes to confidence versus cockiness. But sometimes that Dan goes over in that cocky area, that poor sport area that I just dislike. And so he said a couple of things in the post-game presser, something to the degree of, I guess we wouldn't be in this position if we didn't play this game, because this year they're rewarding people who don't play games, kind of throwing, some shade at Ohio State and how everybody still looks at Ohio State as a college football contender when they have several weeks off often between games. They've only played a handful of games, where the SEC, not everybody has played a full 10 games, because I think Georgia this week will play and they're not playing now. So that will give them only 9 for the season. So I can see areas to be angry on his behalf, but the way in which he presents it, it turns me off, man. It makes me angry, and it's like, ugh, it puts a bad taste in my mouth for anybody who has that kind of mentality. And it's especially somebody that's supposed to be leading a team and not jawing like he does.
In some ways, I feel like it's the Florida way, and hear me out. That Spurrier was a trash talker. He was also a coach who could back it up, because he was going to the SEC championship just about every year. Yeah. And often winning. Then, you've got Florida players who've kind of always liked to chatter. I guess McElwain was the coach when one of the Florida DBs said ducks don't pull trucks leading into the Tennessee game. First, what in the world does that mean? Because you don't sound smart saying that. But then that was also the 1 year in the last, I don't know, almost 15 years. It's not quite 15 years, but over a decade that Tennessee's won that rivalry. I don't have a whole lot of room to speak, because Tennessee hasn't beaten Florida but once in the last decade. But I feel like they've just had this attitude that makes it easy to hate them. And I don't think Mullen has done anything to really change that. So that is a culture thing that can be changed with the head coach. Stupid penalties like throwing a shoe is, as a coach, you allow that kind of stuff. What you see on the field is what you allow as a coach, and it's what you coach. So I've kind of always seen this from Florida. Maybe it's just because I love to hate them, but that's just the impression that I get as a non-Florida fan.
And again, I know that I feel like that Florida has a reputation that we can speak to regardless of the win-loss record of our specific teams that we root for. Because you're right. Again, Steve Spurrier, epic, world-class trash talker, and he had that cockiness as well, but again, could back it up. Oftentimes, especially during the Tebow years with Urban Meyer there as head coach, there was an obvious reason why they could talk trash and back it up. And, Urban Meyer is his own kind of guy that we've talked about here on the show before. But again, the Dan Mullen stuff, it sits on me in a particularly weird way, just because of how bizarre sometimes he brings things up. And again, I don't always disagree with some of his arguments, but the way in which he argues is usually where I go, ugh, come on, man. So whether it was, I think in the first half of the season, him running back out and trying to like taunt or get his fans going, and then talking about we're going to pack the swamp and we're going to fill up the stadium, and then the next week not even having to play a game because of COVID issues. That was a bad look on him. And now the kind of the petty comments that he's made after the LSU game, it doesn't sit well with me. Again, so I think that there's a mixture of pettiness, cockiness, poor sportsmanship that it just, again, maybe this is old man Murphy here talking, but I just don't dig it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cockiness, or maybe lack thereof. Vanderbilt.
Oh yeah.
So changing gears, Vanderbilt has found their next head coach, Clark
Yeah.
Lee. Was he at Notre Dame? Was he Notre Dame
Yeah, he was
defensive
a
coordinator?
coordinator. Yeah.
And what I was reading, hey, Notre Dame has academic expectations. So I heard a lot about, could it be somebody from
Oh,
Notre Dame?
interesting. Yeah.
Could it be somebody else from Stanford? I'm trying to think. There was another school thrown around that's got academic prowess. I don't know. Coming from Notre Dame, I understand the academic stuff. Look, this is still Vanderbilt, and it's the SEC. Now, Notre Dame is playing Clemson in the ACC championship. Already beaten them once, but that was without Trevor Lawrence, so we'll see how much of a difference that makes. But I don't know, I think Notre Dame may have gotten off easy because they were in the ACC. Other than playing Clemson twice in 1 year. But yeah, I want to see Vandy get a good coach.
Yeah, me too.
Because if the bottom rises and pushes everybody else up, good. I want to see him do well. I just don't want to see him beat Tennessee ever. That's kind of how I feel about it. Chris,
Sure.
Do you know anything about Chris Lee? Do you have any thoughts on this hire?
Yeah, I don't have many thoughts on him because oftentimes, again, me personally, I like to see a person with head coaching experience, but that's proven that doesn't mean that's the recipe for success. Again, Jeremy Pruitt didn't have that coming to the Vols, and I still like him. I know that you and I have gone to bat for him on this show several times. I still would like to see him in that position for several years. So it's an interesting point that you bring up about the Notre Dame excellence pursuit when it comes to the student part of the student athlete full picture that you want these college students to have. So that's an interesting point. I'm excited for him. I'm excited for Vandy to be able to move forward and to try to put together what will be next season at this point already. Again, I don't think the game this week against Georgia is now canceled. So that won't be played, which would have been interesting to see if they would have had, I guess Clark Lee would not have even played until after the season's over for Notre Dame, or at least been on the sidelines. So interesting there. Also, just in Vandy news, because the last couple of weeks we've had several pieces of it, especially with Sarah Fuller kicking off a couple of weeks ago. But last week she was able to get 2 points, 2 point after touchdowns that were, again, against your Volunteers. But in the annals of college football history, it's cool to see that she now has points on the board.
Yeah. Good for her. I've read one article that said, look, she's not the first to do this. And the term Power Five hadn't even been around that long.
Sure.
The first, one of the first, maybe the first girl to play started at Colorado and just was treated so poorly there, ended up transferring. And kind of the article is talking about the first is always going to be really bloodied and bruised just from having to break through that glass ceiling, breaking down barriers, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
At the same time, though Power Five is only a newer term, according to this article, I don't know how long it's been around. That she's just, to me, she's building on the success that's been or the hard work that's been done before her. And in my mind, it's like, okay, she talking about female CEOs. Yeah, so and so is not the first female CEO. Yeah, well, she's the first CEO of a multi-billion-dollar business.
Right.
Or something. It's like, she's just taken it to the next level. I don't see why that can't be celebrated.
Sure.
And I mean, I haven't heard anything that said or seen any headlines that say she's the first one to do it in college football.
Right.
It's always the first one in the SEC, first one in kind of the big teams or the big conferences that everybody knows.
Yeah.
How many people know Vanderbilt across the country? I don't know. Not as many as know Ohio State, but I can't even remember where the girl who started at Colorado, but then actually saw game action somewhere else. I can't remember where she went to school. So Sarah Fuller, congratulations.
Yeah, I agree.
Breaking through not the first ceiling, but another one. And we'll see how this continues.
Yeah. Agreed.
So yeah.
Any other thoughts? Just looking back at our games from last week, Tennessee kind of handedly took it to Vanderbilt. But any last thoughts as a Vols fan on that 42-17 win?
I went back and looked because people said, yeah, it's Vanderbilt. Only, I can't remember who it was, only one team has scored more points against Vanderbilt. So Tennessee did pretty well there.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt they were shut out, so it wasn't the lowest they've scored, but they've scored more points this year. So I felt good about that. There was a commitment to execution, and yeah, it's Vanderbilt in a very down year for them. At the same time, just even when you're going against air in practice, when there's no defense on the field, you make mistakes, and Tennessee didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. What I will say, looking forward, because Harrison Bailey, the true freshman, started, I think, had made all of his completions or only had one incompletion when he got pulled. Not sure why, but was really, really interested, was really excited to see how Shrout would do. Shrout did really well too. Yeah. My thought is, if you're going to flip-flop the quarterbacks like that, because they kind of did that throughout the rest of the game, let Shrout start against A&M. If you're really trying to figure out, okay, what's going to work next year, let Shrout start. Maybe, let him play the full first half. If he's still rolling, then let him start the second half. If he's not, let Bailey come out and start the second half. But I felt good about it. What I will say, last week, the thing that intrigued me the most, Auburn beats Mississippi State 24-10. And then they turn around and fire Gus Malzahn. So Gus is gone. And I've talked to a couple Auburn fans. They're not happy with it. And here's the frustrating thing. And again, until Saban retires, it's just going to be a coaching carousel. And all the Auburn players loved Gus. It seemed like the university loved him. I think probably the boosters are the ones who wanted him out because he wasn't winning as consistently as they'd like. At the same time, Auburn fans complain that he's still there. So I was hearing complaints from Auburn fans that he's still there. I'm hearing a lot of complaints that he's gone. And I'm kind of like, what do you want to do? Do you want to keep him or do you want him to go? And I don't know. It's one of those weird situations because he was pretty good. Yeah. And he beat Nick Saban a couple of times.
Yeah, I think three out of the 8 times that they faced each other. I think that's what the record was, 3-5.
So I don't know. Very interested to see where Auburn goes next. I don't know that they'll hire Hugh Freeze, but I'm interested to see if Hugh Freeze where he ends up.
Yeah.
I don't think he's at Liberty next year.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who's an Auburn fan that called a couple of things over the week, which was an interesting thing of saying that that if Auburn probably shouldn't fire Gus, knowing that they still owe him $21.5 million unless they have somebody better that they already know is waiting in the wings. And who that person is, could it be somebody like an Urban Meyer or like a Hugh Freeze or somebody like that? And then he went on to say, it would be an interesting thing if Hugh Freeze came to Auburn to get someone like Baylor's old coach, Art Briles, to then go to Liberty. And then he can kind of have a resurgence at Liberty, kind of like Hugh Freeze has had. And then in a couple of years, he can then move on somewhere. And then within about 24 hours, it was said that Art Briles resigned his post at the high school team that he had been coaching for the last couple of years. So interesting to see what goes on. But yeah, it's wild that you would make a move like that when $21.5 million are on the table. But maybe that's how fed up some of those boosters had become with knowing they were going to have an okay season, but never really a dominant season under Gus.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, I'm going to pose the same question to you. Alabama beating Arkansas 52-3. What are your final thoughts leading into the SEC championship? Was that a good tune-up game? Did maybe starters play too long? What do you think about Alabama?
I always get worried, especially with this season where Alabama has so much to lose to play games when they had already locked up the SEC championship, and there are other teams in the country that aren't playing the same amount of games that some of the SEC teams have. Like there is the bragging rights, and there's the ability for us to be entertained as fans, but then there's also the opportunity for players to get hurt, which one of our guys, defensive player Christian Harris, went down in the first quarter with an injury. So we don't know if he'll be back or what that status looks like right now. But it's frustrating. But with a 52-3 win, I think that we did improve upon some things going into this SEC championship. I'm excited yet nervous as to the gauntlet that we still have to make it to the ultimate heights of playing for a national championship and hopefully winning as well. We have to go through a Florida who's angry and got revenge on their minds as far as the reputation and the Heisman consideration and being dominant in the SEC. So what I saw against Arkansas is about what I expected. But still, it was nerve-wracking, especially seeing one of our top defensive players going down. That said, I'm looking forward to this week, and I think that it's going to be a great slate of games that we have to watch, especially capped off on CBS for the SEC championship game, which, as we mentioned last week, will be one of the last times that's going to be happening because ABC, ESPN is taking over all the SEC games in the near future. So I'm excited for what was and what will be this weekend.
Yeah. Other scores, Georgia beat Missouri 49-14. Not much of a competition there. And we already alluded to this. LSU beat Florida thanks to a stupid penalty that allowed LSU to get a field goal, and then Florida missing a field goal. So LSU wins 37-34. So,
and just I'll quickly mention this as well too. Like, as much as it's a bummer for Marco Wilson to have that penalty that will haunt him for the rest of his days, but he was one player in an entire team that was able to that allowed LSU to be 34-34 with not much time left on the board. You know, an LSU team that have basically had a dumpster fire of a year, and the Florida Gators, which, you know, are about to go play for an SEC championship. As much as that was a stupid penalty, and people will remember him for that more than they'll remember his highlights, unfortunately. He wasn't the only player that allowed them to get into a late in the fourth quarter tied with a 3-6 or 3-5 LSU team at that point.
Yeah. If he had thrown that shoe in the first quarter, we wouldn't be talking about it nearly as much.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Chris, I've got a guest now with us. My son wanted to come say hey.
Hey,
Wanted to help,
buddy.
wanted to help us kind of finish out the show. So, we've been doing our top of the tailgate, the TSIO top of the tailgate tournament of treats.
Yes,
Now,
indeed.
up until this point, it's been regular season. Now we're really getting into the tournament. So what's happening now? Talk to me about the quintuple T
Yeah,
League
man.
of Champions.
So what we've been doing over the past season is every week we have a poll that goes out to our audience on Twitter to see what your favorite treats are, what your favorite snacks and meals and entrees and drinks and side items are for tailgating specifically. And so we knew that leading up to the SEC championship, we were going to be finishing out the weekly pick your top four, but then going into a bracket style Sweet 16, if you will, of our top picks. So we had 10 winners over the weeks, and then we chose another 6 that were either really close or tied for that top spot as well. And so this week we are going to be doing our first rounds of the Sweet 16, as it were, for the top of the tailgate tournament of treats. So this week we have 2 categories. We have one category, which is going to be our drinks category. And then we have another that's going to be our dips category. And so if I'm just quickly looking here, this week on dips, we have 7-layer dip, we have cheese dip, we have buffalo chicken dip, and ranch as our top 4 dips that are going to go head to head. So we're going to choose our favorite dip of those. So go over on Twitter at TSIO Pod and vote for your favorite there. But we also have drinks. And the 4 drinks that we're going to be choosing from this week are our winners from the tie that was our week 3 drinks category, and then our winner from our week 11 cold beverages category, which are beer, liquor, Gatorade, and a hot toddy, baby. So of those 8, go and choose in the 2 categories that we're going to have this week at TSIO Pod on Twitter, and choose your favorite when it comes to the dips: 7-layer, cheese, buffalo chicken dip, and ranch. And then our drinks: beer, liquor, Gatorade, and a hot toddy.
I know what would be my drink of choice definitely the day after, whether I've been drinking the day before or not. Gatorade. Gatorade's always what you need the day
Got to
after.
replenish.
Dehydrate. Love it. So 2 polls this week. Go over to TSIO Pod on Twitter to vote there. Chris, look, CBS just said forget about it when it came to picks. So we're making them here. Though our league is shut down now for the year thanks to CBS. We've got our morning hash brown casserole game, Texas A&M versus Tennessee. This is in Knoxville at 11 a.m. Central on ESPN. I gotta say, I don't know. Has Tennessee figured out enough stuff to keep it close? I think A&M's beatable. I'm just not sure if this Tennessee team is the one to beat them. So I think I'm going to have to go with A&M on this game.
Yeah, I am too. It's interesting that spread is only 14 points, especially of the offensive firepower that Tennessee or the Texas A&M is able to put together several times throughout this season. But an interesting game nonetheless on ESPN there on Saturday morning. So I'm excited to watch it. I think this will be a fun game to watch. But I agree with you. It's hard to root or to say that the number 5 team in the country is going to keep it within 14. But maybe Vegas knows something that I don't, and I'm excited to see what Tennessee brings to the table on Saturday morning.
Me too. Then we've got our afternoon slots. Couple games happening at the same time. Ole Miss takes on LSU on the SEC network at 2:30. And Missouri takes on Mississippi State on the SEC network at 2:30. Okay, Ole Miss is a 2.5-point favorite over LSU. I'm really excited about this. Chris, what do you think about this SEC West matchup?
I really think this is going to be a fun game. With the LSU win that they were able to pull off against Florida last week, they've got a lot of excitement and momentum and finishing out the season strong. But then Ole Miss right now is favored by 2.5 points. So I think that this is going to be a fun one to watch. I would love to see Ole Miss end with some hype. And so I'm going to choose Ole Miss here and see how they can pull it together on Saturday afternoon.
I am too. I want to see the Lane Train roll. Let's roll with Ole Miss. Then Missouri is a 1-point favorite over Mississippi State.
Yeah.
What do you think about this cross-divisional matchup?
I mean, I'm choosing Missouri here. Yeah. Just because Mississippi State has been so confusing to me that it's hard for me to put any faith in what they have to pull together. Even if it looks like on paper that they're a pretty close matchup, I'm going to take Missouri. How about you?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why this is such a close matchup. I think, especially the way Missouri's been playing here recently, I think they win by more than a point. So that sets us up for the SEC championship over on CBS at 7 o'clock Central. I mean, Mercedes-Benz is a big stadium. I don't know how many people will be there, but Alabama and Florida will be there. Alabama a 17-point favorite. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm certainly going Alabama for the SEC championship. I think that they have the tools to really put together a convincing team win. I hope that they really show up. I really hope that our Heisman contenders, Mac Jones and Devontae Smith, as well as Najee Harris, really have an excellent game. There are some areas that I'm worried about, specifically the Kyles over for Florida, Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts, and what they are able to do when they are firing on all cylinders. But it's the over-under for this game is 74.5 points. That is just nuts. So it seems to be an exciting game, exciting possibility, but I'm choosing Alabama to win this in pretty convincing fashion and set up for some fun college football playoffs. That's my hope. What about you, buddy?
I'm not sure. I think Florida at this point, all they can do is be a spoiler. Will it knock Alabama out of the college football playoffs? I don't know. But it would knock them out of a number one ranking. And so then they would have to play somebody that is, according to the committee, better than Alabama. I don't know that there's enough motivation in that for Florida. Saban wants to execute for 60 minutes. He doesn't want to execute for 45 and then coast. So I think Alabama covers the 17 points and goes into the playoffs with a number one ranking. It's going to be hard to convince me otherwise before kickoff. So, Chris, I got to know, how are you going to watch this Alabama game? Because it's time to
pregame.
Tailgate, man cave, living room, pregame. Burgers, ribs, chicken wings, chip and dip, pregame. Scotch and a lot of IPA, Coca-Cola, pregame. Slaying dogs, cornhole, pregame. How you gonna watch?
So, Chris, you've had a lot of opportunities. Last year was a little different, but you've had a lot of opportunities to watch Alabama in the SEC championship game over the last decade.
Yeah.
What is your pregame setup this week for Alabama versus Florida in the SEC championship?
Well, I'm going to try my best to watch some good football leading up to the Alabama-Florida game. And I have done a lot of watching games from my phone or from my iPad this year, even when I've wanted to and had the hopes of watching it up on the big screen. Sometimes, with a full family that aren't able to get out and go do on the weekends like what we're used to do in a non-pandemic world. I've tried to be cool with a lot of my family of like, oh, you're watching a movie right now? All right, I'll watch this game on my iPad. But I have requested, since Alabama has made it to the SEC championship game, and none of us can go anywhere anyway, that my entire family sit down and watch this game with me. So we're going to try to have a really festive atmosphere leading up to the game. And then during the game, sit around with my family and even somebody like my daughter who could care less if who's playing, even the fact that people are playing football at all, she doesn't care. So
right. I was going to ask, because the girls in your house tend to cheer for Auburn. So are they going to be cheering for Florida this weekend, or
no?
Do they just kind of stay mom and just, they're watching what they want to watch on their phones?
That's a really good question. We let the kids do what they want and cheer for who they want. We try not to sway them, even though my son has become a pretty diehard Alabama fan. And for the most part, my daughter as well, when she does care about it. I think with my daughter, she cares more about what the uniforms look like than actually who's playing and who you should pull for. But my wife and I have an agreement that as long as Alabama and Auburn aren't playing each other, that we'll root for the other team. So that really only comes into conflict one day a year. So she'll be rooting for Alabama with me, and we should have a good time. What about you? How are you pre-gaming this weekend?
Taking some time off work this weekend. We were supposed to be traveling. That got nixed because of some COVID stuff going on.
Did it get bo-nixed?
It got intercepted. It got intercepted and sacked and intentional grounding and pick six all in one. We're going to try to stay safe this weekend. So, I think it's going to be, us guys laying around watching some football.
Good deal.
Having a virtual tailgate. I believe we may do one for the national championship. But I believe this will be probably the last one for the year. So join us at 7:00. Go to thirdsaturday.in-october.com to sign up for the virtual tailgate, because we'll be watching. Hopefully we're not washing anything. We'll be watching the SEC championship game between Alabama and Florida. So come hang out with us. Come hang out with me, because Chris, I don't blame you if you're laser focused on that game. But
I'm going to try to pop in at least a time or two, though. Even if I don't stick around long, especially if my team's struggling, I may have, the cartoon sweat beads jumping out of my head. But I'm going to try to pop in at least a time or two.
Yeah, pop in at halftime. Give us your halftime speech. But you can always find us on social media at TSIOPod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find us on YouTube, where we broadcast the podcast. You can go to thirdsaturday.in-october.com, where you can find all our social media links, plus sign up for our virtual tailgate. Go ahead, sign up for next year's Pick'em League. I haven't looked into CBS how they do their bowl pick'em, but we'll probably try to do that too. So be included in our bowl pick'em league as well. Also, you can get our top 10 our tailgating cheat sheet over there on thirdsaturday.in-october.com. So
there's so much that we have to offer.
Yeah,
it's hard not to get tongue tied with all of the things that you could do at thirdsaturday.in-october.com or following us on our socials as well.
Right. And holding a 1-year-old who's starting to get squirmy, trying to read my notes, make sure it's all there. I think we got it all.
I think we got it all, man.
A fantastic regular season, ending it in an interesting fashion. But what do you expect from a season that like this? So we got regular season games and championship games going on in the SEC this weekend. So I wish all of you a Merry Christmas and roll Vols.
Merry Christmas and roll balls, baby.